19-year-old Audrey Griffin never made it home that night. She was walking along a quiet stretch of road on the central coast of New South Wales when she crossed paths with a man she didn't know. A man who should never have been free to roam the streets. Within minutes, her promising future was gone. Stolen in the most brutal way. This isn't just a story about a murder. It's about how a violent predator named Adrian Toran was allowed to slip through the cracks of the justice system again and again, until finally, someone innocent paid the price. Audrey wasn't his target that night. His rage was aimed at someone else, but fate put her in his path, and she never stood a chance. Audrey Griffin was just 19 years old, a Navy recruit with her whole life ahead of her. Friends remembered her as smart, outgoing, and full of kindness. She loved the water, worked hard at the gym every morning, and dreamed of a career of service. Her parents, Kathleen and Trevor, were proud of the young woman she had become, proud of the life she was about to begin. But in March of 2024, those dreams ended violently in a dark creek bed. What makes this case so haunting isn't only the cruelty of her killer, but the fact that so many warning signs were ignored. Adrian Toran wasn't some unknown monster who appeared out of nowhere. He had a long history of violence against women, against partners, against anyone who crossed him. Courts gave him second chances. Police overlooked his escalating behavior, and his wife lived in fear every single day. And on the night Audrey died, Toran was on the hunt. He had already left a string of threatening voicemails for his estranged wife Michelle, promising to kill her. Fueled by anger and hostility, he was prowling the streets looking for her. Instead, he found Audrey. The horror of this story begins there. But to understand how it all came to this moment, we need to step back. We need to look at Audrey's life, at the family who loved her, and at the violent man who crossed her path. Because once we see the bigger picture, the tragedy becomes even harder to accept. Audrey Griffin was the kind of daughter every parent dreams of raising. Bright, kind, and full of life. Her mom Kathleen remembers her as a girl who grew into a confident, caring young woman. Her dad Trevor still talks about how proud he felt every time he saw her push herself. Whether it was waking up at 5 a.m. to train or preparing to start her new journey in the Navy. She had worked hard for a future she was never given the chance to live. That Saturday night in March, Audrey wasn't doing anything risky or reckless. She was simply enjoying a farewell night out with her friends before beginning the next chapter of her life. After leaving the Gosford Hotel, she planned to take an Uber, but instead decided to walk to a friend's place nearby. It was a decision countless young people make every weekend, but Audrey's walk would place her directly in the path of a man whose life was spiraling out of control. Adrian Toran's name was already familiar to the police. His history was long, violent, and alarming. Years earlier, he had assaulted a partner so viciously that he stomped on her chest and broke her arm. He was no stranger to intimidation, fraud, theft, or violating court orders. Time after time, the system gave him chances. Instead of long prison sentences, he was handed community orders or rehabilitation programs. Each time, he slipped back onto the streets, angrier and more dangerous than before. By early 2024, Toran's marriage to his wife Michelle had collapsed. What began as a whirlwind romance quickly turned into a nightmare. Michelle once described him as funny and charming in the early days, but soon saw a man who could flip from calm to violent in seconds. She lived in fear, sleeping with her dogs inside the house as her only alarm system. Even with an apprehended violence order, the threats kept coming. Dozens of phone calls, messages promising to kill her, words that left her sick with dread. On the night Audrey was murdered, Michelle received more of those calls. Toran was drunk, angry, and spiraling. He told her he was on his way to rip her head off, to kill her. Michelle didn't call the police that night. She called so many times before and felt they never acted quickly enough. She had lost faith that anyone would stop him. That decision, paired with a justice system that had failed for years to lock him away, created the perfect storm. While Michelle braced herself for what she thought would be another night of threats, Adrian Toran was already roaming the streets. Audrey, walking alone, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What happened next would prove the instincts of her parents right. This was no accident, no misadventure. This was murder. It was the early hours of Sunday, March 23rd. Audrey had said goodbye to her friends after their night out and started walking toward her friend's home. She didn't know that someone dangerous was lurking in the shadows. Adrian Toran had already been drinking, already fuming, and already leaving vicious voicemails for his estranged wife. His threats were chilling, promises of violence, promises to end her life. But instead of finding Michelle, he stumbled across Audrey. To him, it didn't matter that she was a stranger. What mattered was that his anger needed an outlet. Somewhere along that walk, Toran began following her. The CCTV footage later showed what Audrey herself never knew. A man stalking her steps, keeping close enough to watch but far enough to stay hidden. Audrey had no reason to be on guard. This was a short walk, one she thought would end safely at her friend's place. But by the time she reached the quiet stretch near Aaron Creek, she was no longer alone. Toran confronted her. And in those terrifying moments, everything changed. Audrey fought back. Police would later find mud under her fingernails, proof that she resisted with every ounce of strength she had. She was young, fit, and determined to survive. But against a man fueled by rage and violence, her fight ended in tragedy. Her body was discovered hours later in the creek bed, her belongings scattered nearby. At first, police told her parents it was a drowning. They suggested she may have slipped and fallen into the water. But Kathleen and Trevor knew their daughter too well. Audrey was a strong swimmer, someone who spent hours in the ocean. The scratches on her arms, the bruising, the mud under her nails. It all screamed of a struggle, not an accident. For her parents, the most painful thought wasn't just losing her. It was knowing what she went through in those final moments. Fighting for her life, terrified, realizing she wasn't going to make it. That torment haunted them long after her death. And while the family mourned, Adrian Toran walked free. For nearly a month, he continued to threaten and harass his wife Michelle, living his life as though nothing had happened. The man who had taken Audrey's life was still out there, hiding in plain sight. The truth wouldn't come out until much later, when evidence, persistence, and the voices of grieving parents finally forced investigators to see what really happened that night. From the very beginning, Kathleen and Trevor refused to believe their daughter's death was a simple accident. Police may have called it a misadventure, but Audrey's parents saw the signs. Bruises on her body, scratches down her arm, and that detail that never left Kathleen's mind. Her nails packed with mud, as if she had clawed the earth while fighting for her life. In those first days, the family's grief was mixed with frustration. Instead of an urgent homicide inquiry, they felt stonewalled by investigators who seemed too willing to close the case. Audrey's parents became their own detectives. Kathleen even went door to door around the area, desperate for someone who had seen something, desperate to keep her daughter's story from being forgotten. It took persistence, but eventually, cracks in the accident theory began to show. A friend found Audrey's phone at low tide, lodged in the mud near the creek. How had police missed it after claiming they searched the area daily? The discovery only deepened her parents' suspicions. Meanwhile, Adrian Toran was still free, still tormenting his estranged wife. For Michelle, every day felt like living with a ticking time bomb. He rang her repeatedly, leaving messages like, "See what you've created. I'm going to get you." She had no idea that on the very night she feared for her own life, another woman had already died at his hands. The turning point came weeks later, when detectives finally revisited CCTV footage. Frame by frame, they saw it. A man shadowing Audrey on her walk home. Suddenly, the family's instincts were confirmed. Someone had followed her. When that image was released to the public, it didn't take long for a breakthrough. Michelle came forward. She recognized him instantly. The man following Audrey was her husband, the same man who had been threatening to kill her that very night. It was the moment that shifted the investigation from uncertainty to clarity. With Toran now a prime suspect, police tapped his phone. It didn't take long for him to implicate himself. In a call to a friend, he confessed, unaware that detectives were listening. Forensic evidence added weight. DNA from beneath Audrey's fingernails matched him. Audrey had fought him off and in doing so, left the proof that would bring him down. On April 21st, nearly a month after Audrey's death, police finally arrested Adrian Toran. For Kathleen and Trevor, the call from investigators was devastating. Hearing that someone had been arrested felt like losing their daughter all over again. The wound was torn open, but at least now they had the truth. Audrey had been murdered, but justice was still far from certain, and the question remained, why had this dangerous man been free at all? When Adrian Toran was finally arrested, relief spread through the community. But for Audrey's family, it was a relief tinged with rage. They had always known her death was no accident. Now the evidence was undeniable. DNA under Audrey's fingernails. CCTV of him following her. His own words caught on a wiretap. The monster who had terrorized women for years had finally been cornered. But the arrest also forced everyone to face a haunting reality. This crime could have and should have been prevented. Toran had a long history of violence. He had been convicted of assault, fraud, intimidation, breaching protection orders, and even breaking a woman's arm in a fit of rage. Time after time, judges gave him community orders or suspended sentences. Only months before Audrey's murder, he had been convicted of harassing his wife Michelle, but instead of jail, he was sent to a drug and alcohol rehabilitation program. The judge believed he could be reformed. Instead, 3 months later, Audrey Griffin was dead. As the case moved into the courts, Michelle's testimony painted a chilling picture of the man she once married. She described how he could change in an instant, charming one moment, explosive the next. She shared the dozens of voicemails, the threats, the intimidation, and she admitted that by the time Audrey died, she no longer had faith in police or the justice system to protect her. Audrey's parents sat through it all, heartbroken yet determined. They wanted the world to know their daughter's story, not just that she was killed, but that she was failed. Failed by a system too lenient on repeat offenders. Failed by authorities who dismissed red flags. Failed by a society where a young woman walking home could become a statistic. When Toran finally stood before the court, he faced the full weight of the evidence against him. The jury heard how he stalked Audrey, how he attacked her, and how she fought back until her last breath. They heard about his threats, his history, and his callous disregard for life. The verdict was clear. Adrian Toran was found guilty of Audrey Griffin's murder. For Kathleen and Trevor, it was justice, but it was also hollow. Nothing could bring back their daughter. No sentence could undo the pain. Still, knowing that the man who took Audrey's life would no longer walk free offered some measure of peace. But outside the courtroom, questions lingered. Why had it taken weeks to even recognize her death as a homicide? Why had a violent offender been given so many chances? And why did it take the relentless efforts of grieving parents to uncover the truth? The trial might have ended with a conviction, but for Audrey's family, the fight for answers was far from over. The day Adrian Toran was convicted brought justice on paper, but for Audrey's family, the real sentence is one they will carry for life. Kathleen and Trevor will never hear their daughter's laugh again. They will never see her graduate from the Navy, start a family, or live the future she dreamed of. Every sunrise is a reminder of what Audrey lost and what was stolen from them. For Michelle, the wife Toran once hunted, the emotions are complicated. She feels safer knowing he is behind bars, but she also feels the crushing weight of guilt, wondering if things might have been different if she had called police that night, if the system had listened sooner, if anyone had truly believed the danger he posed. She loved a man who turned out to be a monster, and she must live with the scars of that realization. Beyond the grief and guilt lies an even bigger question. How many more women are at risk because violent offenders like Toran are given second, third, even fourth chances? Audrey's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was a failure of the justice system. A failure to protect, a failure to punish, and a failure to act before it was too late. The police commissioner would later admit that mistakes were made. The case was misclassified, homicide detectives weren't brought in quickly enough, and opportunities to act sooner were missed. A review was promised, along with a vow that lessons would be learned. But for Audrey's parents, those promises come too late. They fought harder than any parent should ever have to, just to prove their daughter had been murdered. What remains now is memory and a message. Kathleen and Trevor refuse to let Audrey be reduced to a statistic. They speak out not only for her, but for every woman who deserves to walk home safely. Their fight is no longer just about their daughter. It's about demanding change, so no other family has to live this nightmare. In the end, Audrey's story is more than the account of a brutal crime. It's a warning, it's a call to action, and it's a reminder that behind every headline, there are parents, siblings, and friends whose lives will never be the same. Audrey Griffin was 19 years old. She was smart, kind, and ready to serve her country. Her life was stolen in an act of senseless violence, but her memory lives on in the voices of those who loved her, and in the determination to make sure her story is never forgotten.